This is R2D Tech, and you better be excited because today it's all about the Huawei P40 Pro. The first thing you're probably wondering is what on earth is up with that display? I don't think I've seen a display wrap over the edge quite that much since the Galaxy S7 Edge. But am I a fan of it? Not really. Yes, definitely a couple of years ago it would have been something really cool, something exciting that you could say you had over any other smartphone. But now it seems to be phasing out with Samsung along with any other company that used to do it. That's because it's just not practical. It makes the phone so much more prone to accidental touches, which is kind of annoying, and also it just distorts the content around the edge. From my perspective, that whole curve around the edge trend is dying out and has been for the last 2 years, and there's a good reason for that. Yes, it offers some features like having app drawers on the edge and things like that, but you can do that anyway. Android is so customizable, and that's kind of the whole point. So should they have gone with this wraparound display? Not really. Don't get me wrong, I love to see companies reduce bezel sizes, but is this the way to do it? I don't think so. Before we get into the specific positives of this phone, it's definitely worth mentioning that software is a major downside on any Huawei device at the moment. No, you're not really going to be getting Android updates, you're not going to be getting Google services because of what's going on with Huawei at the moment. And that is a major thing to consider when you're buying a smartphone, especially if you live in the West. You can say goodbye to things like Google Maps, Google Play, Google Movies, Google Photos, all of it. And personally, those features are one of the main reasons why I buy an Android device and why I currently prefer Android devices over iOS. Are Huawei working on their own software? Yes, but without the Google services, it's not something that I could see myself using anytime soon. Now on to probably one of the main selling features of this phone, as was the case with the Samsung Galaxy Ultra, that's the camera. Your primary lens on the back is 50 megapixels, which will capture an immense amount of detail. Now the photos that you capture are going to be binned down to 12 megapixels, unless you can change this in settings. But that doesn't mean that these photos aren't going to be sharper. They most certainly will be. They've also included a 40 megapixel ultra wide lens, which is definitely something which I like to see. You've got lots of detail, lots of sharpness, and that extra perspective when you're taking photos. And of course, as is the trend with these phones nowadays, they've included that periscope zoom lens, and this will allow you to do up to 5 times optical zoom and 50 times digital zoom. If you're not familiar with what this means, past the 5 times zoom, you are going to be losing quality because it's just digital zoom. But that means that you can zoom up to 5 times without really losing any quality. Unfortunately, these secondary lenses like ultra wides and telephotos often don't have the same level of detail and quality as the main lens. That's partially due to the megapixel count. The telephoto is a 12 megapixel lens, which is still very good. Of course, megapixel count isn't everything with these phones, especially since the main lens is anyway going to bin them down to 12 megapixels. But of course, software processing is where things really kick in with smartphones. And that's why Google have consistently produced probably the best smartphone photos when compared to other Android devices at least. It's very subjective to whether the Pixel takes better photos than the new iPhones, but personally I would say they do. To top this all off, the camera unit on the back, which I must say is an absolute beast when it comes to size, much like the Ultra, they also included a time of flight sensor, which will just help give the phone more information when it comes to depth. So your photos when you're taking portrait mode, for example, will be slightly more accurate, and most likely the edge detection of the subject will be slightly better. Back to the display though, despite me not liking the curved edges, I can't deny that it's a very impressive panel. You get 90 Hz refresh rate, which is not quite as good as what you get with the Ultra, but it will still produce a much smoother result than what you get with the iPhone, for example. Not to mention that this, as is standard with most Android devices now, is an OLED panel, so you'll get those really good blacks, really good contrast and vibrancy. In terms of resolution, it's 1200 by 2640 pixels, So it's not quite 1440p, but it's definitely on the upper end of HD. To be honest, on these smartphones, your eye probably can't detect the difference between something like 1200p compared to 1440p. And onto size, it's a 6.58-inch display, which is definitely pushing it in terms of size, but it's definitely not as big as the 6.9-inch Galaxy Ultra, so it should still be manageable. The processor takes a slightly different route compared to other manufacturers. Instead of going with the Snapdragon 865 like most companies will this year, of course Huawei produced their own chip called the Kirin. The specific one is the new Kirin 990 on this phone, and that actually supports 5G, so if you're interested in getting much faster connectivity in the future, then this phone might be something which interests you, although definitely take that software limitation into account. It's more important than some YouTubers might make it seem. As I said before, I can't imagine using my phone without Google services. Storage-wise, you can get up to 512 gigabytes out the box, but you can also extend that with a nano memory card up to an extra 256 gigabytes. So that gives you a very generous amount of storage for a smartphone. Of course, you might need it without those Google services to upload your photos to. No headphone jack, but it's also 2020, so who needs a headphone jack anyway? You've got your pretty standard bottom firing speakers as well, but what's most impressive about this phone is the amount of wattage which you can charge it with. The battery size is 4200 milliamp hours, which is really large, but not as large as other phones we've seen this year. But does it really matter when you can charge your phone up to 40 watts, which will make it a very quick charging process? You can also wirelessly charge up to 40 watts, if you can find a wireless charger which supports this. Now that's amazing because that means you can charge your phone wirelessly as fast as if you were to plug it in physically. And the reverse wireless charging, a feature which we've got to know with Samsung and Huawei, is also a feature on this phone. It provides up to 27 watts of power if you put your wireless earbuds on it, or even anyone else's phone which supports wireless charging. And don't get me wrong, 27 watts is still very impressive, especially for wireless charging. It's more than Apple's phones can charge with a cable. If you're into recording video with your smartphone like I'm doing right now, you'll be pleased to know that this phone can go up to 4K 60 FPS just fine. Yes, I know the new Samsungs can record in 8K, but this is more of a gimmick at the moment. I wouldn't pay too much attention to it. Lastly, apart from the display, the phone is pretty standard in terms of design. It's got that very aggressive camera unit which we've seen on most new phones nowadays. It's the glass sandwich which you've come to expect, with aluminium sides as well. But the back colour is very impressive. I think they call it satin grey or something like that. It's the sort of colour I could see myself wrapping a car in. It's very impressive, the texture is very nice indeed, and it's something which I have not seen yet on any other smartphone. It's definitely one of my favourite finishes and colours which I've ever seen actually. So I'll give Huawei an A+ when it comes to that. Finishing up on design though, on the front they do have that pill-shaped punch hole camera. That's because they've got an infrared sensor, a depth sensor, and the normal selfie lens. It is on the large side, but definitely not as large as Apple's notches. And to top it off, they've got the under-display optical fingerprint sensor, which they claim is faster and is larger as well, but I definitely wouldn't buy this phone for that feature, even though it is still very nice to have. But should you buy this phone? Personally, I don't think so. It's a very impressive unit, don't get me wrong, but that software limitation is definitely not something I can see myself getting by. It's 2020, we rely so much on all of these cloud services, all of these apps, and since Huawei can't provide that at the moment, I just don't see myself buying this phone, and I can't recommend that you buy this phone either. Don't get me wrong though, I am still impressed with Huawei's effort. The phone itself, the hardware itself, is still very impressive. But that's all I can say on this phone right now. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, you might want to leave a thumbs up so we know you liked it. And if you really like the content which we're producing, then consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell below so you can see our content in the future.